Does not open all the way. Metal screams first, a chain tearing loose. Then wood groans like it's been holding its breath for years. Light slips through the gap. Inside, something moves. Not fast, not desperate. Careful, as if movement has been punished before. A flashlight shakes. It catches a wall carved with thousands of shallow marks. Lines stacked on top of lines, counting something no one was supposed to count. A bowl sits on the floor, scraped clean so many times the metal is thin. A mattress presses against concrete that still smells damp. And then the beam lands on her, curled tight, barely breathing, eyes open but unfocused, like they learned long ago not to hope. She raises a hand, not to block the light, to ask permission. Her voice comes out dry, fractured, a sound that has not been used in years. Please, she says, don't take them. No one knows who they are. No one knows how many. No one knows how long she has been here. Above her, a house stands quiet. Neighbors wave. Cars pass. Life goes on. Below it, something unspeakable has been surviving in silence, protected not by locks alone, but by trust, routine, and the decision to never look too closely. Because whoever did this didn't hide her from the world. They hid her inside it. And once you understand who put her there, you'll never hear silence the same way again. The sound does not belong to renovation. It isn't sharp enough to be solid. It isn't empty enough to be hollow. It's wrong. The hammer stops mid-swing. Dust drifts through the beam of a work light and refuses to settle, like the room itself is holding its breath. Someone taps the wall again, slower this time, listening instead of working. The answer comes back softer than it should. There is space behind this. That realization changes the air immediately. The conversation dies. No one jokes. No one speculates. The kind of silence that follows is not confusion, it's recognition. People who work with buildings know when something has been altered on purpose. The opening is cut carefully, too carefully. Behind the concrete is a narrow passage, poured by hand, uneven and sealed. It does not belong to the original structure. It leads away from the house, not deeper into it, like something trying to avoid being seen. At the end of the passage is a door. Not a door meant for entry. A door meant for containment. It is reinforced, chained, locked from the outside. When the chain is cut, the sound echoes longer than it should. Metal has memory. The door resists as it opens, protesting inch by inch, as if it has learned its role too well. The light goes in first. It sweeps the floor, the walls, the corners, slow, deliberate, respectful. A cot. A bowl worn thin from use. The walls are marked, but not violently. The scratches are small, organized, placed in rows that make sense only to the person who made them. Someone counted something here. Then the light finds her. She is curled on her side, motionless, as if stillness has kept her alive. Her eyes are open but unfocused, trained not on faces but on movement. When the beam touches her skin, she flinches, not away, but inward. She raises a hand, not to block the light, to ask permission. Her voice, when it comes, is dry and unfamiliar even to herself. Please, she says, don't take them. No one understands what she means. Not yet. She is helped to sit up, then pauses, waiting. Her body does not trust kindness. It waits for the condition that usually follows. When it doesn't come, she inches forward, every movement cautious, negotiated. The opening above her feels unreal. Air moves freely there. Sound doesn't echo the same way. She hesitates at the threshold, turning her face away from the brightness. Light has never meant safety. As she is guided upward, the room reveals more of itself. The ceiling is low from added layers, patched again and again to hold something in. The floor is worn smooth in one spot, as if someone stood there often, listening. Above ground, voices multiply. Radios crackle. Shoes scrape against concrete. People gather without knowing why their stomachs have dropped. She does not look at them. She is listening. She listens for a sound that does not come. Keys. They do not come. Still, her body waits. She is wrapped in a blanket. The fabric is heavy, grounding, unfamiliar. She grips it tightly, not for warmth, but for proof that it is real. When she is moved again, she does not resist, but she keeps her eyes down. A vehicle door opens. She pauses once more. The world smells different here. Open. Uncontrolled. Too many directions at once. Someone says a word meant to calm her, but words have never been the problem. Choices have. As the doors close, a low hum begins, steady, controlled, familiar. It sounds too much like the system that kept her hidden. She leans back and closes her eyes. Somewhere nearby, a person who built this space is still breathing freely. Still trusted. Still unremarkable. Someone who made a series of decisions. Not in anger, not in chaos, but in calm, deliberate steps that worked for a very long time. And now, for the first time, something has interrupted that routine. The door is open, but the system that kept it closed hasn't been named yet. And systems don't collapse just because one secret escapes. The first question comes quietly, not from the people standing outside, not from the ones taking notes, not from the voices filling the street with speculation. It comes from inside her. Why now? For years, sound meant danger. Footsteps above. The shift in weight that signaled a decision had been made without her. Silence was something to be endured, not trusted. And yet the sound that broke her world open was not one she had learned to fear. It was careless, unplanned. Someone, somewhere, had decided to change a wall. In the medical unit, the light is dimmed on purpose. The staff speak in short sentences, careful not to crowd her with explanations she hasn't asked for yet. Her vitals are taken, then taken again. Hands move gently, but she still tracks every motion. Her eyes flick to the door each time it opens. She is waiting for someone specific. He does not come. That absence is confusing in its own way. A clinician asks her name. She hesitates. It has been spoken so rarely that it feels fragile, like it might break if she says it out loud. When she finally does, the syllables land softly, almost apologetically. The clinician repeats it back, steady and respectful, anchoring it to the room. For the first time in a long while, her name exists somewhere other than her own head. Another question follows. Simple. Ordinary. How long have you been down there? She doesn't answer. Not because she doesn't know, but because the answer feels too large to fit into words. Time underground didn't move forward the way it does above. It folded. It circled. It stalled. Years were not measured by calendars, but by patterns. Shoes in the morning. Shoes at night. Bare feet only when he was certain no one was nearby. Instead of a number, she asks her own question. Is he here? The room stills. No one answers immediately. That pause tells her more than words could. She looks away, toward the window she hasn't dared to face fully yet. Outside, the sky is fading. She tries to decide if she likes that or not. Daylight used to mean exposure. Night used to mean listening. Both carried consequences. Investigators begin with what they can see. The hidden room is photographed, measured, cataloged. Every choice made in that space is treated like evidence, because that's exactly what it is. The height of the ceiling, the thickness of the door, the direction the hinges face. Someone wanted control more than comfort. Someone planned for this to last. A pattern emerges quickly, even before anyone speaks it aloud. This wasn't improvisation. This wasn't a crime of chaos or impulse. It was routine, repetition, maintenance, a system. That word circulates quietly between professionals. It carries weight. Systems don't require constant force. They rely on predictability, on silence, on people doing what they're expected to do without being reminded. The neighbors are questioned next. Not aggressively. Not yet. Just conversations. Did you notice anything unusual? Most answers are immediate. No. Nothing really. He kept to himself. Nice enough guy. A few answers come slower. Someone mentions noises, but shrugs them off mid-sentence. Another talks about lights being on late, then laughs nervously. One person recalls a time the police came and left again. No one says they were sure. Certainty is rare. Plausible explanations are common. The man who lived above the hidden room understood that. He built his life around it. A retired healthcare worker. Quiet. Reliable. The kind of person people describe using words like steady and private. Someone who knew how to speak calmly when authority figures asked questions. Someone who understood paperwork, procedures, and the power of documentation. He made decisions that blended into routine. When relatives asked questions, he answered them cleanly. Not too much detail, not too little, just enough to end curiosity. When acquaintances asked about her, he said she was away. That word did a lot of work. Away doesn't demand follow-up. Away is temporary, flexible, unquestioned. Years passed that way. Inside the room, she learned what decisions cost. Every choice she made, when to speak, when to stay silent, when to move, had consequences that arrived later. Never immediately. Delay was part of the control. She learned to think several steps ahead, not in hope, but in harm reduction. If I speak now, this will happen later. If I resist, this will come next. If I comply, the day will end faster. Obedience wasn't loyalty. It was calculation. The pregnancies followed the same pattern. The first one terrified her because she didn't understand it yet. Her body changed without explanation. Pain arrived without warning. When she tried to ask questions, she was told not to think about them. Thinking made things worse. By the second, she understood enough to be afraid in advance. By the third, fear was constant but contained. By the time the pattern repeated again and again, fear had been replaced by something colder. Expectation. Each time, she hoped for deviation. A mistake. A delay. A decision made differently. None came. The children were taken the same way every time. Quietly. Efficiently. With language that framed it as necessary. As inevitable. As something she was helping with, not suffering through. Control works best when it borrows the language of care. Above ground, the system expanded. Paperwork appeared where paperwork was expected. Documents existed because documents are believed. Signatures looked right. Dates lined up. People who saw them assumed someone else had checked. That assumption is a form of trust. And trust, once given, becomes a shield. As the years accumulated, the idea that anything could be wrong became harder to imagine. The longer something exists without challenge, the more legitimate it feels. Normal is not what is right. Normal is what is familiar. In the medical unit, she is given food she didn't ask for. She eats slowly, not because she isn't hungry, but because abundance feels dangerous. Too much of anything used to mean consequences. A social worker sits nearby, not asking questions yet, just staying present. The choice not to push is deliberate. Pressure has already shaped her entire life. Later, gently, a different question is offered. Do you remember the last time you were outside? She closes her eyes. She remembers a doorway, a voice behind her, the sound of metal. Then nothing like this ever again. She answers honestly. No. The realization lands heavily in the room. People imagine captivity as constant violence. They picture screaming, chains, resistance. What they don't picture is routine. Breakfast at the same time. Shoes at the same hours. The same words spoken in the same tone. Routine blurs suffering into background noise. That's why it lasted. The man who built the room did not rely on secrecy alone. He relied on predictability. On people believing what they expect to be true. On neighbors choosing politeness over discomfort. On institutions trusting paperwork more than instinct. He relied on the idea that monsters look different. By the end of the day, the question has shifted. It is no longer what happened. It is how this was allowed to continue. And beneath that, more unsettling still, how many decisions, small, reasonable, ordinary decisions, had to align perfectly for a door like that to stay closed for so long. As night settles, she lies in a real bed for the first time in decades. The mattress is too soft. The room is too quiet. There are no footsteps to mark time. She listens anyway. Somewhere, the person who made all of this possible is being questioned. Not accused yet, just asked to explain. And explanations, she knows, can be very convincing. The system is under strain now, but it hasn't broken. Not yet. Because the most important questions about motive, about intent, about how far this truly went, are still unanswered. And the person who holds those answers has spent a lifetime deciding when, and if, the truth is ever allowed out. Before the hidden room became a cell, Before the walls measured time in scratches and footsteps, there was the beginning of its construction, not in stone, but in decisions. Decisions made quietly, almost imperceptibly, until their consequences could not be ignored. He was a man of habits. Routine was his lifeline, and it became the framework for what followed. Every action, every schedule, every outward display of normality was carefully calibrated to prevent suspicion. He learned early that control need not be enforced constantly. Control could be built like a foundation, silently, and reinforced by compliance, both from the person he dominated and from the world that chose not to look closely. She was still young then, 17, alone after her mother's death, with a father who carried grief like armor. That grief was convincing. Neighbors saw it. Relatives heard it. Strangers accepted it. And in the shadows of ordinary life, he began to shape the space she would inhabit. Not with immediate violence, but with subtle, unremarkable steps. A locked basement door framed as a storage precaution, hours spent alone in preparation, the gradual separation from friends, school, and anyone who might question his choices. The foundation was psychological as much as physical. At first, there was reasoning. "It's for your own safety," he would say, or "No one else can protect you like I can." Words shaped reality before walls did. She believed him because she had to. There was no one else. Grief had isolated her, trust had been misdirected, and fear had been abstract until it became immediate, until it was learned in the tone of footsteps and the shift of a chair on concrete. These early choices were deliberate, not violent, not overtly cruel, but they set a pattern. Each small assertion of authority created compliance. Each explanation he offered, truths half told or disguised, was a layer of camouflage, and the world, observing only what it expected to see, never pressed beyond polite curiosity. He knew this. Every handshake, every nod of sympathy, every Sunday in church reinforced his legitimacy. It was in those months that the first structures of captivity took root. She learned quickly that asking questions drew attention she could not afford. Silence became a survival tool. Movements were measured. The rhythm of her life came from his decisions, not her own. Eating, standing, speaking, resting, all orchestrated. The first pregnancy, the first enforced labor, would later follow naturally from a life already calculated, already confined, already dictated in its most minute details. The environment itself became an accomplice. The basement was damp, unwelcoming, odorless to some but oppressive to anyone who had lived there day after day. Light came only in measured doses. A single flickering bulb defined time. It replaced clocks and calendars. There were no windows. Seasons were understood by subtle changes. The temperature of the walls, the shift of shadows, the weight of air when it rained. Each observation, each interaction, was a data point in her father's system, and she recorded it unconsciously, marking days on concrete, memorizing the cadence of his steps, cataloging gestures, repetitions, and phrases. Even that, however small, was within the rules he had set. The basement, the routines, and her own behavior were all the result of choices designed to enforce order and to erase resistance. Outside, the world reinforced the deception. Neighbors continued their routines, lawnmowers, school buses, church services, and he performed for them with precision. He volunteered, he smiled, he helped. He was the man who suffered, who grieved, who followed all expectations of normalcy. And that performance fed the foundation of the secret. Routine above ground protected the extraordinary cruelty below. Politeness became compliance. Courtesy became camouflage. And the people who might have asked questions, friends, family, neighbors, were steered by habit into trust. She did not yet understand fully what had been constructed, only that her world had narrowed. Each decision she observed, each expectation she met, became part of her training. She was learning endurance, but also the weight of obedience. Every micro-choice had significance. Answering when spoken to, moving when instructed, staying still when left alone. These were not simple acts of compliance. They were the building blocks of control, repeated thousands of times over years, until instinct replaced thought. Survival demanded vigilance. Vigilance demanded attention to patterns, and attention to patterns demanded the quiet suspension of hope. It was an education no one had consented to, and it was relentless. Early signs of compliance were subtle, almost invisible. She would test the boundaries in small ways. A whispered question, a slight pause before following an instruction, a glance toward the stairs when no one watched. Each test was met with immediate consequences, not necessarily harsh, but corrective. A reprimand disguised as guidance, a lesson in obedience wrapped in apparent care. The consequences were calibrated to teach without overt trauma at first, establishing that decisions have results. Each small failure reinforced the structure. Each small success confirmed that she could survive by navigating his rules perfectly. Control extended beyond the physical. Emotional states were managed meticulously. Her fear was acknowledged and then directed. Sadness became guilt. Desire became obligation. Her memory of her mother, initially a source of comfort, was gradually repurposed into a tool for compliance. Reminders of loss, of dependence, of the world's indifference. She learned that hope could be measured, rationed, and taken away. And in that learning, the foundation of psychological captivity solidified. At the same time, he built his external narrative. To friends and family, he was diligent, caring, and measured. To institutions, he was organized, precise, and credible. Paperwork was filed, stories were told, and appearances were maintained. Nothing overtly criminal could be detected. Everything else was hidden beneath layers of normality. Chores, volunteering, church attendance, polite conversation, financial transactions that appeared mundane. Each element was part of the foundation he had laid, and each element reinforced the invisibility of his acts. She watched. She learned. She adapted. But every adaptation cost her something essential: freedom, self-determination, even the ability to imagine a different life. The choices she was allowed to make were constrained within invisible boundaries defined by his control. Every time she followed the rules, her survival was reinforced. Every time she hesitated, consequence awaited. And yet, each day she was alive, each day she endured, was a testament to the resilience that existed within the framework he had constructed, a resilience that would later become her only weapon. Even as she endured, small cracks began to appear in the structure. A sound overheard by a neighbor, a shadow glimpsed through a basement window, a misremembered detail from a distant visitor. These anomalies were dismissed, rationalized, or forgotten by the world above. And each dismissal reinforced his confidence, reinforcing the foundation he had built, a life hidden in plain sight, protected by expectation, and maintained through the careful management of both perception and reality. This foundation was not just the basement, not just the locked door, not just the predictable steps of his routine. It was the cumulative result of every choice made over decades, both by him and by everyone who looked away. It was the architecture of compliance, the construction of fear, the engineering of endurance. It required patience, subtlety, and an understanding of human behavior that was precise, disciplined, and unrelenting. By the end of this act, the audience understands something critical. The foundation of this crime was laid long before discovery, not through brute force, but through decisions meticulously made and habits carefully cultivated. Every wall, every routine, every act of silence contributed to an environment where captivity could last decades. The question that emerges is not merely what happened, but how it was allowed to continue. And the answer lies in choices that no one yet dared fully confront, in a system that has been quietly operating under the guise of normal life. The room she has finally left is empty now, but its impact resonates. The foundation of control remains visible in her memory, in the routines she learned to navigate, in the strategies she employed to survive. Outside, the neighborhood continues its rhythm, unaware, while the decisions made decades ago still echo, because foundations, once laid, do not crumble easily. They persist. They define the shape of the space. They determine who survives, how they survive, and what the world will see. And somewhere, just beyond reach, the person who built it is still making choices, decisions that have yet to be questioned, patterns that have yet to be unraveled, and the quiet confidence that the foundation he constructed will hold until someone finally decides to pull it apart. By the time the system was fully built, it no longer needed improvisation. It ran on rhythm. That's what made it so durable. Not rage, not chaos, not constant force. Just repetition. Predictability. The quiet confidence of someone who had learned what the world rewards. Steadiness on the surface, silence underneath. Above ground, his life tightened into a pattern that looked like virtue. Bills paid early. Grass cut before it grew wild. A wave to the mail carrier. A soft smile in the right moments. People trust what they can count on. He understood that trust isn't earned in grand gestures. It's earned in small, boring proof. Week after week, year after year. And once you become someone reliable, people stop looking for what you might be hiding. That's the first stage of ascent, legitimacy. It wasn't just that he controlled her. It was that he controlled the story around her absence. When someone asked where she was, he didn't react defensively. He didn't act offended. He didn't over-explain. He answered calmly, the calm of a man who didn't expect to be challenged. Away. Safe. Busy. The words were plain enough to be believable, vague enough to be unprovable. And the world prefers vague answers, because vague answers don't demand action. Some relatives asked more than once. He adjusted details depending on who was listening. Not because he was sloppy, because he was strategic. Different audiences required different versions of truth. To one person, she was with family. To another, she was in school. To another, she was doing fine. The point wasn't accuracy. The point was closure. Give people an ending, and they stop searching for the middle. Inside the basement, she learned the same principle from the opposite direction. He never gave her endings. He offered just enough hope to keep her compliant. Just enough softness in his voice to make cruelty sound like care. He would speak to her through the door or from the stairs, never too close, never too long, and he always sounded controlled. That control wasn't accidental. It was part of the ascent. People imagine captivity as chains and screaming, but the true engine is often something quieter, authority. The kind that feels normal when you've lived under it long enough. He spoke like someone used to being obeyed. When she begged, he didn't shout back. He corrected her. When she cried, he didn't panic. He waited. When she asked why, he didn't argue. He explained, slowly, calmly, as if he were teaching a lesson. That tone did something worse than violence ever could. It made her doubt her own reality. It made her feel childish for resisting, ungrateful for wanting freedom. This is where ascent becomes something more than imprisonment. It becomes conditioning. And that conditioning spread beyond the basement. Because as the years passed, the system expanded outward, into paperwork, into routines, into quiet exchanges that turned her suffering into something else entirely. Not just a hidden crime, a functioning operation. The pregnancies were part of the structure now. They didn't arrive as isolated horrors. They arrived like seasons. A predictable cycle of changes in her body, changes in his behavior, changes in the rhythm of his visits. He watched. He tracked. He managed. To her, each pregnancy carried the same conflict, fear versus hope. Every time, there was the same irrational belief that this time might be different. This time someone might hear. This time the door might open. This time she might be allowed to keep the child. But hope is not the same as expectation. Expectation belonged to him. And he built his confidence on the fact that the world outside was cooperating. Unknowingly, but still cooperating, with the silence that kept him safe. There were moments, early on, where that silence almost broke. A muffled cry at night. A strange thud from below. A shadow behind basement glass. But each time, something prevented the final step. The step that would have changed everything. A neighbor didn't want to seem nosy. A friend didn't want to accuse a grieving man. A police officer didn't want to escalate without proof. And proof, in his world, could be created. That's when the ascent becomes unmistakable. Because he didn't just hide. He performed. If noise carried, he produced a benign explanation before anyone could demand one. Plumbing. Storage. Rodents. Old houses settle. The weather makes wood complain. He spoke with the certainty of someone who expected belief. And he got it. Over time, that certainty hardened into arrogance. Not loud arrogance. Not reckless arrogance. The most dangerous kind, quiet arrogance. The kind that says, I have tested reality and it bends for me. At some point, he stopped living in fear of discovery and started living like discovery was impossible. He made changes to the structure when needed. Patch cracks. Covered seams. Quietly reinforced weaknesses. The basement wasn't just a prison, it was a project. A long-term investment. And like any investment, it required upkeep. Inside, her life narrowed further. Not just physically, mentally. She learned to measure her own emotions like resources. To ration anger. To hide despair. To conceal hope. She became fluent in stillness. Stillness meant survival. Stillness meant fewer consequences. Stillness meant fewer reasons for him to come down. But the system did not run on her silence alone. It ran on his access to the world. And he had access because he had built something powerful in the eyes of the community. Respectability. People liked him. That mattered more than they realized. They liked him because he was predictable, because he held doors, because he showed up at the right events, because he spoke gently, because he seemed like a man who had been through loss and came out quieter, not bitter. This is how monsters stay hidden, by looking like the exact kind of person you'd feel guilty doubting. And once people feel guilty doubting you, you can do almost anything. The operation expanded in the only way operations expand, demand and supply. There were people who wanted babies. People who didn't ask too many questions. People who had reasons to avoid scrutiny. Money changed hands quietly. Paperwork appeared cleanly. The kind of clean that makes people relax. Even if the details didn't fully add up, the surface looked organized. Professional. Controlled. And control, to most people, looks like safety. This is a key turning point in the ascent. He wasn't just hiding a captive. He was using his skills, his status, his access, and his calm to move through systems designed to protect people, and making them work for him instead. The more he succeeded, the more he believed in his own untouchability. And untouchability changes behavior. It makes you bolder, not in obvious ways, not suddenly violent in public, not reckless with strangers, but bolder in what you permit yourself to do, what you stop worrying about. He began to take risks that would have terrified him in the early years. Late-night movements, quiet exchanges, conversations with outsiders who should have been threats but became customers, accomplices, or silent beneficiaries instead. Every successful risk reinforced the belief, this is working. Inside the basement, she felt the change without seeing it. Because when someone becomes confident, they become careless in small ways. The door might stay open a half-second longer. A sentence might slip that wasn't meant for her ears. A routine might shift. Those small changes were the only clues she ever got that the world above was not frozen. That something was evolving. And that evolution did something terrible. It made her realize the truth. This was not temporary. This was not a breakdown of grief. This was not a mistake. This was a life, his life, built on the permanence of her captivity. That realization didn't arrive like a dramatic collapse. It arrived like cold water. Quiet. Final. The hardest part was what followed. Because once you accept permanence, you either break, or you adapt so deeply you don't recognize yourself. She adapted. She began to live inside rituals. Tiny rules she made for herself. Because when every choice is stolen, the smallest self-made rule becomes rebellion. Count breaths. Press palm to wall. Trace letters in dust. Listen to the pattern of shoes. Shoes became time. Shoes became warning. Shoes became proof that he still existed. And therefore, her danger still existed. And somewhere in that same period, something else quietly took shape. He wasn't just controlling her. He was controlling how she understood love. When he spoke softly, he made it sound like protection. When he withheld food, he framed it as discipline. When he took children away, he described it as better for them. He took the language of loyalty, family, duty, safety, and turned it into chains she couldn't see. And that is the most effective captivity of all. Because if you can make a person feel like obedience is love, you don't need ropes. You only need words. Above ground, the neighborhood continued. And in that continuity, he found something priceless. Time. Time to refine the system. Time to expand it. Time to correct weak points. Time to become more than a man hiding a crime. Time to become a man confident he could outlive suspicion. But systems that expand also create pressure. The bigger it gets, the more moving parts it has. The more people who become involved, even indirectly. And the more people involved, the more opportunities for fracture. That is the threat climbing beneath the surface of his ascent. Because one day, a neighbor might listen a second longer. A former coworker might ask a follow-up question. An officer might refuse to leave without seeing downstairs. Or someone connected to the quiet exchanges might panic. Might talk. Might leave a paper trail that cannot be smoothed away. And inside the basement, where she has survived by reading patterns, she begins to sense something she hasn't sensed in years. A shift. Not freedom. Not rescue. Just a shift in the rhythm of the system. And when a system shifts, it's never because things are getting safer. It's because something is starting to go wrong. Pressure doesn't announce itself the way danger does. Danger is loud, sudden, obvious. Pressure is quieter. It shows up in small changes, tiny disruptions in routine that mean nothing to an outsider, but everything to someone who has survived by memorizing patterns. A delay in footsteps. A door that closes harder than usual. A voice that stays calm but loses its softness. Inside the hidden room, she notices it first. Not because she knows what's happening above ground, but because the system feels different. And the system is all she has ever had. For years, his control ran like a machine. Predictable, measured, efficient. Now the machine begins to stutter. It starts with timing. He comes down later than usual. Or earlier. Meals arrive unevenly. Sometimes the bowl sits outside the door longer before it slides in. Sometimes his shoes linger at the top of the stairs as if he's listening. To her, to the house, to something else. When he speaks, his words remain controlled, but his patience narrows. A small irritation leaks through the cracks. It's subtle, but she has lived inside subtlety long enough to treat it like oxygen. She watches for it the way other people watch for storms. Pressure is building, and pressure always comes from somewhere. Above ground, he has always relied on one simple advantage. Normal life is noisy enough to hide almost anything. Neighbors are busy. People have their own troubles. The world prefers explanations that keep it comfortable. But comfort wears thin over time. Not because people become braver. Because repetition plants doubt. A noise once dismissed as plumbing becomes harder to dismiss after the 10th time. A light once explained as late-night work becomes strange when it happens year after year. A story about someone being away becomes suspicious when it never evolves. Normal life does not protect secrets forever. It only delays exposure. And the longer exposure is delayed, the more fragile the system becomes when the delay finally ends. One neighbor hears something again, muffled crying, low and sharp, like a sound being swallowed. Another catches a shadow behind the basement window at the wrong time of night. Someone notices the basement door always stays locked, even during storms, even when it would make sense to open it for ventilation. These are not dramatic revelations. They're irritations. Little grains of sand in the machinery of denial. And the most dangerous thing for someone like him isn't a scream. It's a question. Questions create attention. Attention creates scrutiny. Scrutiny breaks systems. So he responds the way he always has, with control, with documentation, with calm. But now he has to respond more often. And every response carries risk. Pressure makes liars work harder. Pressure forces decisions. That's the key. A system can run smoothly when it remains unseen. When suspicion is rare, his calm is enough. But when suspicion starts to gather, quietly, like water behind a wall, calm alone becomes insufficient. He needs reinforcement. He needs stronger explanations. He needs a wider shield. That's when he turns outward. Because a system like his doesn't survive for decades without learning how to manipulate more than one victim. It needs a surrounding layer, a community layer, where people unconsciously participate. They don't know they're participating. That's why it works. He leans into public virtue. More church attendance, more favors, more gentle conversations on front steps. He becomes even more visible in the ways that matter: polite, helpful, grieving. Not too perfect, just perfect enough. People begin to repeat his image for him. Nice man, private but kind. Hard life, poor guy. Those phrases become bricks in the wall that keep suspicion from entering. Pressure forces him to build that wall higher. But pressure also does something else. It changes him inside his own system. Because when a person has lived untouchable for long enough, they begin to treat risk as insult. They become less careful, not because they forget danger, but because they start believing in their own immunity. That belief breeds recklessness, and recklessness creates cracks. Inside the basement, she begins to notice signs of those cracks. Not in the structure, though those exist too, but in his behavior. He speaks faster some days. His tone tightens. He asks questions he never asked before. Did you make noise? It's said calmly, but it lands like a threat. Her throat closes. She didn't mean to. She didn't even realize she had. Sometimes pain escapes a body without permission. Sometimes grief does too. When you've lived in silence for decades, the smallest sound feels dangerous. She swallows and answers carefully. No. He pauses at the top step longer than usual, as if deciding whether to believe her. And then he says something that confirms what she has been sensing. People are watching. It's the first time he's admitted it. Not directly, not fully, but enough. That sentence is pressure leaking into the basement. She wants to ask who. She wants to ask how long. But she's learned the cost of curiosity. Questions do not bring answers in a place like this. They bring consequences. So she stays quiet. And the silence becomes heavy again, but different. For years, silence belonged to him. Now silence starts to feel like something else. Like tension. Because if people are watching, then that means someone has started to notice. And noticing is the first step toward collapse. But collapse is never clean. It comes with escalation. Pressure begins to shape the operation in harsher ways. He becomes stricter with sound, stricter with movement. He reinforces rules that have always existed but were once flexible. He checks more often. He leaves less space for unpredictability. When control is threatened, control tightens. That tightening shows itself in her body. She becomes smaller, more careful, more still. She presses her palm against the wall again and again, a ritual that has become her proof of existence. She counts breaths. She counts them not to calm herself, but to remain silent. Because now, more than ever, silence is survival. Above ground, pressure comes from more directions than just neighbors. Time itself becomes a threat. Every year that passes increases the risk of accidental discovery. Properties change hands. Renovations happen. Pipes break. Foundations crack. Utility workers dig. Inspectors come. A new family moves in next door and doesn't share the old neighborhood habits of minding your business. The longer something is hidden, the more likely it is to be found, not through investigation, but through chance. Chance is what systems fear most, because chance cannot be controlled. And he knows it. That's why he becomes more obsessive about the structure. He patches. He covers. He reinforces. He watches the house the way a jailer watches locks. He understands something the neighborhood does not. Secrets don't die from exposure. They die from negligence. So he refuses to be negligent. But pressure changes people. Even the most disciplined mind begins to fracture under constant vigilance. The effort of hiding becomes exhausting. The fear of discovery becomes intrusive. And paranoia begins to creep in. Not loud paranoia, but a subtle shift where every sound feels suspicious. A knock at the door feels sharper. A neighbor's greeting feels less friendly. A police car passing feels less ordinary. He begins to see threats everywhere. And when threats feel everywhere, a person's behavior changes. That's the moment the system begins to destabilize. Not because the basement door weakens, but because the mind that controls it begins to strain. This is where pressure becomes dangerous for her in a new way. Because when captors feel threatened, they don't always respond logically. They respond emotionally. They become unpredictable. And unpredictability is lethal. One night, his footsteps come too fast. He reaches the basement door and speaks through it without his usual patience. Stay quiet. Not advice. Command. She nods even though he can't see it. Her body moves into stillness instinctively. She presses herself against the far wall, away from the door, as if distance could protect her. Above, something happens. A muffled conversation. Voices outside. The sound of a car door shutting. A pause. Then the voices fade. Nothing comes of it. But the message is clear. Someone came close. That close call becomes part of her mental landscape. It changes the way she listens. It changes the way she hopes. Because hope is dangerous too. If you begin to believe rescue is possible, disappointment can kill you faster than captivity. So she tries not to hope, but her body betrays her. In the dark, she whispers something she hasn't whispered in years with real meaning behind it. Please. Not to him. To the world. Pressure also affects the wider network, whether she knows it or not. A system that involves transactions, paperwork, and movement always carries risk. Someone gets nervous. Someone asks questions. Someone regrets. Someone talks. Maybe an outsider who benefited from the system begins to fear consequences. Maybe a buyer realizes the story doesn't add up. Maybe a paper trail surfaces. Maybe money moves in ways that draw attention. Pressure travels like infection. And even if the neighborhood remains quiet, institutions do not stay asleep forever. Patterns are noticed. Records are reviewed. A name appears too often. A timeline doesn't fit. A signature repeats unnaturally. Pressure builds slowly, invisibly, until suddenly it isn't invisible anymore. Inside, she senses none of those specifics. But she senses the effect. He is no longer simply controlling her. He is fighting to control everything else. And when someone begins fighting, mistakes happen. The basement itself begins to show it too. Small vibrations in the wall. Faint cracking. Not enough to destroy, but enough to shift. It reminds her of something. The house is not immortal. Concrete weakens. Mortar dries and splits. Wood bends over time. Even prisons age. And for the first time, she feels a new kind of fear. Not the fear of being trapped. The fear of what he might do if he thinks he's about to be caught. Because if people are watching, then he might decide she becomes evidence. And evidence can be eliminated. Pressure creates that kind of thinking. Pressure forces irreversible choices. That's what makes this stage so dangerous. Not the past. Not what he has already done. But what he is willing to do next to keep the system alive. The act ends with that thought sitting in the dark beside her, heavier than any chain. If he believes the world is getting closer, does she become something he can't afford to keep alive? And above ground, somewhere behind the calm mask and polite nods, a mind that has lived for decades in control begins to calculate what survival will require now. Because systems under pressure don't simply bend. They break. And when they break, someone always pays first. Fracture doesn't look like collapse at first. It looks like overcorrection. A system under threat doesn't immediately fall apart. It tightens, sharpens, hardens. It tries to become more perfect, more silent, more efficient. That's what makes fracture so difficult to recognize from the outside. Because to the neighborhood, to the people passing by, to anyone who only sees the surface, everything still looks the same. The lawn still gets trimmed. The porch light still switches on at dusk. The same calm face still appears at the door. But inside the system, in the place where routine has carried control for years, something begins to fail. It begins with trust. Not her trust in him. That was taken long ago. This is different. It's his trust in the world's cooperation. For decades, he relied on one unspoken agreement. People will choose comfort over confrontation. They'll choose politeness over instinct. They'll choose explanations over effort. That agreement has always been the real lock on the door. Now, it begins to weaken. Not because the whole neighborhood suddenly changes. Because one or two people start to hesitate at the old excuses. One or two people start to listen longer than they should. One or two people start to feel the weight of their own silence and wonder what it's been protecting. That tiny shift is enough. Because systems like his don't fear certainty. They fear doubt. Doubt spreads. Doubt makes people talk to each other. Doubt makes them compare stories. Doubt makes them notice patterns that were once ignored. And the moment people begin comparing patterns, the performance begins to fail. Above ground, cracks appear in the narrative. A former coworker sees him by chance and asks the same question they asked years ago, casual, polite, ordinary. How's your daughter? The question is harmless on its face. But time has sharpened it. A daughter is not a pet. A daughter grows, changes, builds a life. A daughter leaves traces. When he answers the way he always has, the words sound thin. Away. Fine. Busy. No pride. No detail. No warmth. Just closure. And closure without evidence is suspicious to people who suddenly realize they've never seen proof. That suspicion doesn't become accusation yet. It becomes something worse for him. It becomes a story told quietly to another person. You ever notice? I always thought it was strange. Do you remember the noises? The neighborhood begins to develop a second narrative. Not public, not spoken in daylight, but whispered between kitchens and driveways and church hallways. That second narrative doesn't need to be true yet. It only needs to exist. Because once it exists, his control over perception is no longer total. Inside the basement, she feels the change before she can understand it. For years, time was measured by one thing: his footsteps. Work boots, church shoes, soft slippers. Those sounds were her calendar, her weather, her warning system. Now, the footsteps shift. They're more frequent, less predictable. Sometimes they stop above the door and linger, not with authority, but with listening. As if he is trying to determine whether the basement itself has become risky. When he speaks through the door, he asks questions he never used to ask. Did you hear anything? She hesitates. Because it's not a question for information. It's a question for loyalty. If she answers wrong, she becomes the threat. So she answers the only safe way. No. Even when the truth is more complicated. Even when she has heard voices outside at odd hours. Even when she has heard a knock at the front door that didn't sound like a neighbor. Even when she has heard the muffled rise and fall of tension upstairs. Conversations that don't match routine. She answers no because survival depends on keeping his fear from turning toward her. But his fear has already turned inward. Fracture begins to show itself in the way he moves. He used to be careful, patient, controlled. Now he moves with a sharper edge, as if everything is urgency, as if time has begun to shrink. And that feeling, time shrinking, changes the entire system. Because when time feels limited, people start making decisions they once avoided. He becomes more suspicious, not just of the neighborhood, but of everything connected to the system he built. He begins checking, counting, watching. He inspects the basement door more often. He checks the chain. He listens to the walls. He stands at the top of the stairs for too long, perfectly still, as if trying to hear breathing. His paranoia becomes its own rhythm. And paranoia is never stable. It spreads like rust. It corrodes the original logic that made the system so durable. Calm routine. Now, routine is disrupted by fear. The outside world doesn't see it yet, but she does. She sees it in the way meals arrive, sometimes too little, sometimes delayed. She sees it in the tone of his voice, still calm, but tighter, thinner. She hears it in his breathing when he pauses outside the door, as if calculating. He is doing math, not financial math, survival math. What is the risk now? How close are they? What do I do if they come back? And then there is the worst part. She realizes he may be asking another question too. What do I do with her? That question doesn't need to be spoken for her to feel it. A system like this can tolerate many things. It cannot tolerate exposure. And when exposure becomes possible, Everything inside the system becomes either asset or liability. She has been both. For years, her captivity was the foundation of everything he controlled. Now it may become the reason he loses it all. That is what fracture is. The moment a person begins to see their victim not as a controlled object, but as danger. Above ground, the second narrative grows. A neighbor remembers hearing thuds. Another admits hearing muffled crying. A third remembers the basement door always locked. Someone recalls police once coming and leaving. Individually, these memories sound like nothing. Together, they form a pattern. And patterns are what institutions respond to. Not because institutions are brave, because patterns create liability. Now the system begins to attract the kind of attention it has avoided for decades. Not emotional attention, but procedural attention. An inspection, a follow-up question, a report filed with a small note, possible concern. Those words are poison, not because they prove anything, because they open the door to the possibility of proving something. He senses it. He becomes more aggressive in protecting perception. He doubles down on normalcy. More smiles, more church, more public presence. But the performance begins to feel strained, like someone acting calm while their house burns. And strain makes people notice, even the ones who don't want to notice. Inside the basement, her body reacts before her mind does. She begins sleeping in shorter bursts. She wakes at the faintest noise. Her heart stays elevated, like it never fully comes down. Because fear has changed flavor. It used to be stable, predictable fear, controlled fear. Now it's unstable, unpredictable. And unpredictable fear is the kind that kills people. There is a night that marks the fracture clearly. Not because something dramatic happens, but because his behavior shifts past a line. Footsteps come fast. Too fast. The basement door rattles. Keys scrape. The chain tightens, loosens, tightens again, as if his hands are shaking. He speaks through the door. His voice is low. Too low. Stay quiet, he says again. But this time he adds something new. Whatever happens, stay quiet. The phrase is not instruction anymore. It's preparation. Her stomach drops. Preparation means he expects something. Preparation means he expects confrontation. Preparation means the outside world is closer than she realized. And the word whatever opens an abyss. Whatever happens could mean police. Whatever happens could mean questions. Whatever happens could mean the end of his control. And the end of his control might mean he makes an irreversible choice. That's the core tension now, not whether she will be found someday, but whether she will survive the moment he realizes she might be found. The next day, routine continues, but barely. He moves through the neighborhood like always, but his eyes skin more than they used to. His posture is tighter. He lingers less in conversation. He avoids follow-up questions. Avoidance is its own confession. People might not call it that yet, but they feel it. And as pressure continues, fracture spreads through every layer of his system, including the external network he relied on, the quiet transactions, the paperwork that once seemed clean. When fear enters networks, loyalty becomes transactional. People who were silent before begin thinking about self-preservation. Someone might destroy evidence. Someone might cut ties. Someone might talk. And the moment even one person begins to choose themselves over him, the operation begins unraveling from the edges. The fracture is now complete. The system still stands, but it no longer feels untouchable. It feels hunted. Inside the basement, she presses her palm to the wall again. The same ritual, the same proof. But this time, the wall vibrates faintly, as if something is moving nearby, as if the house itself is shifting. And the most terrifying thought creeps in, quiet, uninvited. If the wall finally opens, will it open to rescue? Or will it open to the final decision he has been avoiding for decades? Because fracture isn't the fall. Fracture is the moment right before it, when the first real break happens inside the mind of the person who built the cage. And once that break happens, nothing that follows can be controlled the way it was before. There is a point in every long crime, every system built on control, where the original motive no longer matters. At first, it might have been grief, obsession, twisted ownership, a need to dominate what felt like the last thing that belonged to him. But eventually, none of that is the reason anymore. Eventually, the reason becomes simpler. Survival. Not her survival. His. That is the point of no return. Because once survival becomes the motive, every decision becomes sharper, faster, less human. The mask doesn't fall off because he suddenly reveals who he is. The mask falls off because he no longer has the luxury to keep holding it in place. And the terrifying part is this. To the outside world, he still looks the same. That's how deep the performance goes. A calm voice at the door. A polite nod at the curb. A familiar presence in the usual places. People want stability so badly they confuse it with goodness. They see a steady man and assume safety. But steadiness can be rehearsed. Steadiness can be the final stage of calculation. Inside the house, his behavior begins shifting in ways that are too precise to be called panic. Panic is messy. This isn't messy. This is adjustment. He changes how often he checks the basement. He changes how he times his movements. He changes how he handles noise. He changes what he says through the door. Every modification is small, but together they create a different atmosphere. A tighter atmosphere, like a room where oxygen is slowly being reduced. She feels it immediately, because she has survived by reading microshifts for years. She knows that when he grows quiet, something is coming. When he grows efficient, something is being planned. When he stops offering explanations, he has already decided she doesn't deserve them. The first undeniable sign arrives in a way that feels minor, but nothing is minor in a cage. The food changes. Less. Not just smaller portions, different texture, different rhythm, longer gaps between the bowls sliding in. It doesn't feel like cruelty for cruelty's sake. It feels like preparation. Preparation for movement. Preparation for absence. Preparation for change. And the human mind, trapped long enough, begins to think in extremes. Is he preparing to leave me here? Is he preparing to move me? Is he preparing to? She stops herself before the last thought can finish, because finishing it makes it real. Above ground, the pressure has reached a threshold where small doubts become action. It's never one dramatic accusation. It's never a heroic moment. It's a sequence of decisions made by ordinary people who finally run out of excuses. Someone mentions the noises again, but this time they don't laugh afterward. Someone remembers the locked basement window, but this time they don't shrug it off. Someone recalls the old police visit, and instead of feeling reassured, they feel ashamed. Because reassurance without investigation becomes guilt later. The network of silence begins to unravel the way cloth does when you find the loose thread. Not all at once. One strand at a time. A former coworker asks a follow-up question. Not loudly, not with confrontation, but with a firmness that didn't exist before. Where exactly is she now? The question is simple, but it pins him. Vague answers are safe only when people accept them. This time, the person asking doesn't accept. He feels it, the shift in their tone, the way they hold eye contact too long, the way they don't release the subject. And something inside him recalculates. Because the danger is no longer abstract. It has become personal. The world has moved from passive to curious. Curiosity is lethal to a secret like his. That's when the point of no return arrives. Not as an event, but as a mental decision. A decision he makes silently. A decision she can't hear, but can feel. The system can no longer remain unchanged. So he changes it. That night, his footsteps descend differently. Not the usual pace. Not the usual pause. He comes down with purpose. The chain rattles. The lock shifts. He doesn't open it fully. He never does. But he opens it enough to speak closer than usual. His voice is calm. Too calm. The world is changing, he says. She doesn't answer. She can't. Her throat is tight with the terror of hearing him speak like this. As if he's explaining weather, not fate. People ask questions, he continues. Still calm. Still measured. Then he says something that cuts deeper than any threat. You understand what that means. He's asking for loyalty. Not the kind he ever deserved. The kind he has trained into her through fear and isolation. A trained loyalty is not love. It's survival behavior. And he's counting on it now. He's counting on the same conditioning that kept her quiet for decades to keep her quiet through whatever comes next. This is the sick inversion at the center of control. He has imprisoned her, and now he needs her to cooperate with his freedom. She breathes shallowly. The air between them is thick with something neither of them says aloud. If the world opens the door, he loses everything. So he must prevent the world from opening it. And if he can't prevent that, then he must prevent what the world finds. That is the point of no return. Because now her existence isn't merely hidden. It is dangerous. The next day, routine continues on the surface. It always does. That's how monsters survive. He goes to the places he always goes. He nods. He smiles. He allows himself to be seen. Visibility becomes camouflage. But there are differences. He stays less time in conversation. He avoids certain neighbors. He watches passing cars more carefully. He reacts to noises with a tension that leaks through his polite shell. And people notice. They don't know what they're noticing, but they feel it. They feel the same thing prey feels when a predator stops blending in perfectly. Inside the basement, she hears new sounds now. Not just footsteps. Not just keys. Sounds from the wall. Faint vibrations that weren't there before. Tools somewhere nearby. Perhaps a renovation next door. Perhaps repairs in the neighborhood. But to her, it feels like the wall itself is waking up. And that idea terrifies her, because it creates hope. Hope is not gentle in captivity. Hope is violent. Hope makes you listen too hard. Hope makes you imagine rescue. Hope makes you forget caution. Hope makes you move. And moving has always been punished. Still, the vibrations continue. Tap. Pause. Tap. Then, one evening, she hears something she has never heard from that direction before. Voices. Not muffled footsteps above. Voices from the wall. Close. Close enough to catch fragments. She presses herself against the concrete, heart racing so hard she thinks it will betray her. Her breathing turns shallow. Her hands tremble as she braces herself, listening. A new voice says something sharp and procedural, the tone of authority. Another voice answers. Then silence. Then a louder tool strike. Dust falls from the ceiling like a warning. And she realizes two things simultaneously. Someone outside is closer than they've ever been. He will know it too. This is the lethal moment. The moment where rescue becomes possible and danger becomes immediate. Because if he hears those voices, if he realizes the wall is weakening, if he understands that chance has arrived, the one thing he cannot control, then he will make the final decision, the irreversible one. That night, he comes down again. His footsteps are not slow. They are controlled, but urgent. The chain scrapes. His breathing is different. For the first time, she hears something in it that resembles fear. Not fear of what he's done. Fear of being caught. He speaks close to the door. Not a sound, he says. The calm has narrowed into command. Then he adds, barely above a whisper. If they come, you stay silent. Stay silent. Not to protect yourself. To protect him. That's the grotesque final step. He has reduced her life to a tool of his survival. And then his voice shifts, just slightly, into something colder. Do you understand? This isn't a question. It's a test. A test of conditioning. She knows what failing tests cost. She answers the only way she can. Yes. But inside her chest, something else answers too. Something quiet but stubborn. No. Because if the wall breaks open, she cannot go back. She cannot survive another cycle. Another season. Another stripped child. Another lie. This is the point of no return for her too. The realization lands slowly. Even if rescue comes with danger, it is still rescue. Even if freedom hurts, it is still freedom. Even if the world outside is unbearable, it is still real. And that thought gives her something she hasn't felt in years. A decision of her own. Not a plan yet. Not a rebellion. Just a single inner step. If the opportunity appears, she will take it. She will risk it. Because she has already lived through the worst outcome. Decades erased. Above ground, the wall is struck again. Harder. The structure vibrates. The air changes. For the first time, the system built on routine begins to face the one force it cannot defeat. Accident. A neighbor's renovation. A crack spreading through concrete. A hammer hitting the wrong spot. Chance. Chance is what destroys systems like this. Not morality. Not justice. Not even investigation. Not at first. Just chance. And now chance is at the edge of her world. The act ends with two simultaneous truths hanging in the dark. He is preparing for the system to be discovered. And she is preparing for the moment she must choose whether silence keeps her alive, or whether silence finally kills her. The fall doesn't arrive like a crash. It arrives like a seam giving way. A thin fracture in concrete that has been holding too much for too long. Above ground, the hammer strikes again, and this time the wall answers differently. Not with hollow thud, not with solid echo. With softness. The kind of softness that should not exist inside a foundation. The foreman stops without being told. People who build things for a living develop instincts that feel almost like superstition. They know when something isn't merely damaged. They know when something has been altered. The flashlight goes in first, like a cautious animal testing air. Dust rolls outward in slow motion. The opening widens. And as the space reveals itself, the first thing everyone notices is that it isn't random. This is not an accident. This space was made. A narrow passage runs along the border of the house. The concrete is mismatched. The angles are wrong. Someone poured this by hand. Someone wanted a route that wasn't visible. Someone wanted to create distance between ordinary life and what was hidden beneath it. At the end of the passage sits a door. Not a utility access. Not storage. A door reinforced like a boundary between worlds. Bolted. Chained. Locked from the outside. The chain is the first undeniable truth. It speaks more clearly than any confession. Doors do not lock themselves from the outside unless someone intends to keep something or someone in. Police arrive thinking it could be illegal construction. A zoning issue. A hidden bunker. Something embarrassing, maybe criminal, but containable. They crouch at the opening, lights angled downward. They test the air. The air coming out is stale. But it carries something else too. A human presence that has been trapped so long the room itself has absorbed it. Breath. Sweat. Old linen. Dampness that doesn't belong to empty spaces. An officer touches the chain with gloved fingers. The metal is worn. Used. Not decorative. A system has been running here. Bolt cutters snap shut. Metal screams. The sound is sharp enough to make even hardened professionals glance away for a fraction of a second. Something about cutting a chain feels final. Like the world is about to cross into something it cannot unsee. The door does not swing open easily. It resists. It sticks. It yields in inches, not because it's weak, but because it has been designed to hold. When it finally opens enough for the light to enter, the beam slides across the floor and catches the first objects. A cot. A bowl worn thin. Walls carved with marks. Rows of scratches that look like counting. Not random violence. Not vandalism. Timekeeping. A human attempt to track years that were never supposed to exist. Then the light finds her. And everything pauses. She is curled tight, knees drawn up, arms folded as if protecting the last piece of warmth inside her body. Her skin looks pale, deprived of sunlight, her hair tangled and flat, her eyes open but distant. When the flashlight touches her face, she does not recoil in panic. She flinches with discipline, like someone trained to expect consequences. Her hand rises slowly, not to shield herself, to ask permission. Her voice comes out like sand. "Please," she says. "Don't take them." That sentence hits the officers like a second chain. Who are they? How many? Where? For a moment, nobody speaks. Not because they don't know what to say, but because anything they say feels inadequate in that room. One officer kneels, careful, slow, lowering the flashlight beam so it doesn't blind her. The voice that follows is soft, almost intimate. "We're here to help you." Help. It's a word loaded with assumptions. A word the outside world uses easily. But for her, help has always been a trick word. A word used to lure. A word used to control. Her eyes flick to the door. Not toward freedom. Toward fear. She is waiting for him. That is the first sign to the rescuers that they aren't dealing with ordinary trauma. They're dealing with long-term conditioning. Because even now, At the moment the door is open, her mind still expects the system to correct itself. Systems like this don't end. They punish. They restore order. They make examples. The rescue team speaks slowly, keeping movement minimal. A blanket is draped around her shoulders. She tenses at the touch, but does not pull away. Touch has always meant violation, but the warmth confuses her. Warmth without cost feels unreal. As they guide her toward the opening, the light grows brighter. She squints, turns her head away, and instinctively curls into herself. The world has been reduced to a dim bulb for so long that daylight feels violent. At the threshold, she stops completely. Not frozen in refusal. Frozen in disbelief. The air outside carries the smell of leaves and concrete and ordinary life. The kind of air that has never reached her lungs without permission. She takes one step into it and staggers, as if gravity has changed. A paramedic steadies her gently. They shade her eyes. They speak in short phrases designed not to overwhelm. You're safe. You're okay. We've got you. Inside, her body listens. But her mind doesn't accept it yet. Because safe is not just a state. Safe is a world. And her world has never been safe. Outside, neighbors gather, silent, stunned, confused. People stand with hands over mouths, with tears they don't yet understand. Some faces are pale with horror. Some are pale with recognition. Because horror isn't the only emotion in a neighborhood like this. There is guilt. Guilt has a specific shape. A person replaying a noise they once dismissed. A thud at night. A muffled cry. A basement door always locked. Every dismissed sound becomes a weight. Every ignored suspicion becomes a debt. This is the fall, not just of a man, but of a community's illusion. The illusion that evil announces itself loudly. The illusion that danger looks different. The illusion that politeness is neutral. Back inside the hidden room, officers photograph everything. They document the cot, the bowl, the marks on the wall. They don't yet understand the full scope, but they already understand the intent. This wasn't accidental confinement. This was designed. And design requires planning. Planning requires time. Time requires confidence. Someone believed they could do this forever. That belief is what has now been shattered. Above ground, the man who built the system is approached. This is the moment everyone expects drama. A man running. A man shouting. A man breaking. But the fall rarely looks like that. The fall often looks like a calm face trying to hold itself together. He answers questions with practiced composure. He plays confusion. He leans on his image. He speaks like someone used to authority believing him. But something is different now. The door is open. The evidence is physical. And physical evidence does not negotiate. When investigators confront him with the truth, when they say there is a woman in a hidden room connected to his house, his calm tightens into something colder. Not grief. Calculation. Because he understands immediately, the system is not just failing. It has failed. And now he has only one option left. Control what happens next. Control how much they learn. Control how far the story spreads. Control what the world thinks of him when his mask is ripped away. But even that control slips from him. Forensic teams begin searching the house. Every drawer, every cabinet, every locked box becomes a potential archive of the system. Paper trails, medical supplies, records, evidence of transactions. And the deeper they search, the more the fall accelerates. This is what happens when a long-hidden system is exposed. It unravels fast because it contains too many threads. Threads lead outward. To paperwork that doesn't match. To names that don't align. To money that can't be explained. To patterns that suggest something far worse than imprisonment. The officers know it now, even if they don't say it aloud yet. This isn't one crime. It's a network of crimes. And networks create victims beyond the visible one. In the ambulance, she rides wrapped in blankets, shielded from harsh light. Her hands grip the fabric hard enough to whiten her knuckles. She looks out through a crack in the doors at the moving world, streetlights, houses, passing cars, and her breath catches. It's too much, too fast. Freedom is not gentle when you've lived without it. Her body wants to believe. Her mind wants to protect itself. And the first question she asks isn't about the man who trapped her. It isn't about revenge. It isn't about justice. It's about them. Please, she whispers again. Don't take them. The paramedic leans closer, voice calm. Who? She shakes her head slightly. Her lips tremble. And the sentence that follows is the real collapse of the entire system. Not the chain breaking. Not the door opening. Not the arrest. This. He takes them. That's all. Not past tense. Present tense. As if it's still happening. As if it never stopped. As if rescue has come too late for other lives. In that moment, the fall changes shape. It becomes bigger than one hidden room. It becomes about what has been moved through that room over the years. What has been taken. What has been erased. And the implication is brutal. If she is speaking about them, then the hidden room was not only a prison. It was a source. A pipeline. A place where lives began and disappeared. The act ends there, with the system exposed but not fully understood, with the most disturbing truth only now entering daylight. The door was not just keeping someone in. It may have been the gateway through which others were taken out. And the world has only just started to learn what that really means. The door is open. The chain is gone. The hidden room is sealed off with evidence tape and photographed from every angle, as if enough documentation might keep the horror contained inside a file. Floodlights turn night into something harsh and white. Officials speak in clipped tones. Neighbors gather behind lines they're told not to cross. On the surface, it looks like an ending. But endings are a luxury this story doesn't offer. Because when a system like this collapses, it doesn't collapse neatly. It leaves residue. It leaves unanswered questions so heavy they become permanent fixtures in the lives of everyone who touches them. And it leaves the victim with a different kind of prison. After, in the hospital, her body is treated first. That's what the world knows how to do. Blood draws, scans, nutritional assessments, bruises documented, old injuries mapped like geography. Every procedure is performed gently, but every touch drags her back into a world where touch has always meant control. She flinches anyway. Not from pain. From association. The clinicians explain what they're doing before they do it. They ask for consent before they move her blanket. They wait for her nod. They speak like people who understand what was stolen from her isn't only time, it's agency. But agency is not something you hand back like a coat. Agency is something the nervous system has to relearn. Even simple choices, water or juice, lights on or dim, door open or closed, make her freeze. When you've lived for decades with choices made for you, the sudden burden of choice feels like danger. Choice means responsibility. Responsibility means consequence. Her mind has been trained to fear consequences. So the smallest decision becomes exhausting. At night, she sleeps in short bursts. Her body won't allow deeper sleep because deep sleep requires safety. And safety is still theoretical. She wakes at the softest sound, the squeak of shoes in the hallway, the click of a cart, the quiet beep of a monitor. Footsteps remain her clock. Even now, even free. Sometimes she presses her palm against the wall beside the bed without realizing she's doing it. The gesture is automatic, like breathing. A ritual from the hidden room that followed her into the world above. That's what captivity does. It doesn't end when the door opens. It migrates. The investigators learn that quickly too. They enter the house expecting to find a crime scene. What they find is an archive. Evidence isn't just in the basement. It's everywhere. In drawers. In folders. In locked boxes hidden behind ordinary things. Documents that look legitimate until you read them closely and realize they're too clean. Too neat. Too rehearsed. A system doesn't survive for decades without paperwork. Paperwork is how systems convince other systems to look away. Birth records appear. Medical notes. Vaccination forms. Names that don't lead to real mothers. Dates that align too perfectly. And when analysts trace those documents, they find something even more disturbing than forgery. They find consistency, not sloppy lies. A professional lie. A lie built the way a clinical report is built. Measurable, believable, routine. It becomes clear that whoever did this wasn't only controlling a hidden room. They were controlling the administrative world that surrounds human lives. And in that administrative world, a piece of paper can override a voice. A signed form can override instinct. That's how children disappear without alarms. That's how a woman can be away without ever being searched for. That's how the world becomes an accomplice without realizing it. The neighborhood begins to fracture in a different way now, not structurally, but psychologically. People stand in front of cameras and say the same sentence in different forms. I had no idea. Some say it with true shock. Some say it with panic. Some say it because they need it to be true. But behind that sentence is another truth they don't want to speak aloud. They had something. A moment. A sound. A shadow. A discomfort they dismissed. Those dismissed moments return now like ghosts. A neighbor remembers late-night thuds and realizes they weren't plumbing. Someone remembers a cry and realizes it wasn't a cat. Someone remembers thinking the basement door was always locked and realizing they never asked why. And now the neighborhood develops a new ritual: guilt. Guilt shows up in sleepless nights, in obsessive replays, in people staring at their own kitchens remembering the moment they decided silence was easier than involvement. Guilt becomes its own prison. But guilt does not save anyone, and it does not return lost time. Inside the legal system, the story shifts again. Charges are prepared. Investigators build timelines. Prosecutors assemble evidence into categories that courts can understand: imprisonment, assault, trafficking, abuse, fraud. Courts need labels. But labels cannot hold what happened. Because even as officials try to turn this into a solvable case, one fact refuses to fit cleanly into paperwork. The children. She said, "Don't take them." Then she said, "He takes them." That plural is the dark center of everything. Investigators pursue it immediately. DNA samples are taken. Records are cross-referenced. Analysts build family trees the way you build maps after disasters, trying to trace where lives were moved. The results confirm what the hidden room implied. Over the years, children were born in that basement. And the children did not stay. Some records lead to sealed adoptions. Some lead to missing paperwork. Some lead to payments, cash movements that suggest a transaction rather than an adoption. The system expands beyond the house now, like poison spreading into groundwater. Every document becomes a question. Who else knew? Who else benefited? Who else participated? That question unsettles officials more than they admit. Because the implication is bigger than one monster and one victim. It's about how many people were willing to accept an explanation because it suited them. In therapy, she begins telling her story in fragments. Trauma rarely comes out as a clean narrative. It comes out as pieces, sensations, sounds, colors, smells. The smell of damp concrete, the buzzing bulb, the sound of a lock, the pause before footsteps. A clinician asks gentle questions designed to anchor her in the present. What do you see right now? She looks around the room slowly. A window, a chair, a cup of water. The world is too big. She whispers something she has whispered for years, but now she's saying it to someone who can hear her. I'm still here. Those words are not inspirational. They are defiant. Because being still here is not a victory lap. It's a statement of survival against a system designed to erase. Sometimes she speaks about her mother, how her death reshaped everything. The clinicians listen carefully because they understand that grief is the first fracture that allowed everything else to happen. A child who loses a mother becomes vulnerable. A father who becomes the only authority becomes absolute. Isolation becomes the room where control grows. The therapists don't frame it as fate. They frame it as decisions. Because decisions are what can be named. And naming decisions is the first step in reclaiming power. But reclaiming power doesn't erase the central wound. She wants to know where the children are. Not out of curiosity, out of identity. Motherhood is not just a biological event. It's a bond formed in minutes that can last a lifetime. And even if she held them only briefly, her body remembers. Her mind remembers. She remembers the cries, the weight against her chest, the warmth leaving her arms. And now freedom forces a new kind of pain. The pain of imagining where they are. Are they safe? Do they know who they are? Do they carry something in them they can't explain? Do they ever wonder why their origin story feels thin? Investigators tell her some have been traced, but not all. Some records are sealed. Some were fabricated so well that the lie created an entire false identity that cannot be easily undone without destroying the life built on it. And that's the cruel paradox of this aftermath. Justice requires exposure, but exposure may harm the children. The world debates what should be done while she sits quietly with the fact that her children, if alive, are adults now. Adults with lives. Adults with histories built on documents that were forged. Adults who may never know that their birth was a crime. Or worse, adults who sense something is wrong but have never had language for it. The courtroom becomes the public's attempt at closure. But closure is another luxury. The man who did this is charged. Evidence is laid out. The hidden room is described in sterile language. Lawyers speak calmly, because law cannot afford emotion. In the courtroom, the system that protected him, paperwork, trust, routine, turns against him. But even if he is convicted, the conviction cannot touch the deepest injuries. A sentence cannot return years. A verdict cannot restore identity. A punishment cannot locate 20 missing lives. And the story becomes something darker than a courtroom drama. It becomes a question of what remains. The neighborhood tries to move on, but it can't. People drive past the house and see it differently. A normal-looking home becomes a symbol of everything people don't want to think about. The basement window becomes an accusation. The church pew becomes an accusation. The polite wave becomes an accusation. And the most haunting thought settles into the community's collective mind. If it could happen here, behind tidy hedges and quiet smiles, then where else is it happening? How many locked doors are protected not by walls, but by everyone's fear of being wrong? How many victims are still waiting for a hammer strike, an accident, a renovation, a crack, to reveal them? In her room, she is asked what she wants now. It is a question that should be simple, but it's the hardest question anyone can ask someone who has been controlled for decades. What do you want? She stares for a long time. Want is dangerous. Want used to create punishment. Want used to mean disappointment. But eventually she answers in a whisper. I want them to know. Them. The children. Not vengeance. Not fame. Not even comfort. Just truth. And truth is where the story ends. Not with resolution, but with a final disturbance. Because truth is not always healing. Sometimes truth is a weapon. Sometimes truth is a rupture. Sometimes truth is something that will splinter lives that were built on lies. And yet she still wants it. Because without truth, she remains trapped in another way. She remains a story people tell about her. A victim on the news. A case file. A headline. Truth would make her more than that. Truth would make her real in the lives that were taken from her. And the final line of this story is not comfort. It's the lingering question that settles into the listener like a weight. If an entire neighborhood can live above a hidden room for decades, if institutions can accept paperwork over instinct, if routine can disguise captivity so completely, then the most terrifying possibility isn't that this happened once. It's that it's happening now, somewhere close enough for you to hear it. If you ever decide to listen, some stories end with a sentence. This one ends with a door still half open. Because even after the chain was cut, even after the room was exposed, even after the truth surfaced in daylight, the most important parts of this story never came back. Not the years, not the children, not the version of life that should have existed. And what makes this case unbearable isn't only what happened inside that basement. It's what happened outside of it. A street that kept moving. A neighborhood that kept waving. A community that kept explaining away sounds it didn't want to understand. A system doesn't survive for decades on violence alone. It survives because people learn to call fear something else. Privacy, grief, respect. None of my business. And maybe that's the real echo of this story, the part that doesn't stay in one house. Because the scariest thing about a hidden room isn't that someone built it. It's that everyone else lived above it like it wasn't there. So tonight, when the world gets quiet, when your street settles, when a house nearby goes dark, ask yourself something uncomfortable. If you heard it, faint, muffled, undeniable. Would you call it plumbing? Or would you knock? If you want more long-form true crime documentaries told with full realism, no fiction, no dramatization, subscribe now and turn on notifications. And if this story stayed with you, leave a comment with one word: listen. Because silence is what keeps cages standing.